Someone wanted Lee Westbrook dead. They just hadn't told him yet. San Francisco's skyline sparkled like scattered diamonds as Lee stepped into the vault. Music pulsed. Champagne flowed. His party is night. The tech world's golden boy had everything. Cash App, Square, mobile coin. Success wrote itself in his smile. Then his phone buzzed. "I know what you did." 5 words. Unknown number. His fingers froze over the screen. Jordan Matthews shouldn't have been there. Not after everything. Yet there he stood at the bar, watching Lee with eyes that carried thunder. Their handshake hung in dead air between them. "We need to talk." Jordan's voice cut through the club's chaos. Lee knew that tone. It was the same one Jordan had used the day their partnership shattered. But tonight felt different. Darker. In his pocket, the phone buzzed again. The message waiting there would change everything. Because in Silicon Valley, secrets are currency. And someone was about to cash out. Lee's eyes narrowed as he stared at Jordan. The music throbbed around them. But the space between them felt like an empty room, silent and charged. Jordan had always been direct, but tonight there was something different in his tone. Something that made Lee's stomach twist with unease. "You want to talk here?" Lee asked, glancing around at the noise of the club. Jordan shook his head, his jaw tight. "No, it's not about the party. It's about what happened between us." The sudden seriousness in Jordan's voice made Lee's blood run cold. For months, their friendship had been strained, a friendship that once felt like family. Now it was hanging by a thread. "Come on," Lee said, forcing a smile. "We can talk about this tomorrow. Tonight's for celebrating, right?" Jordan didn't smile. Instead, his eyes seemed to burn with frustration. He grabbed Lee's arm, pulling him away from the crowd and toward the exit. Lee yanked his arm back. "What the hell are you doing?" "I'm not letting you run from this anymore, Lee," Jordan hissed. "You think you could just keep walking away from the mess you made? You ruined me. And now you think you could just brush it off." Lee took a step back, shocked. "Ruined you? I didn't ruin anyone. You made your choices. I didn't force you into anything." Jordan's eyes flashed with anger, and Lee immediately regretted the words. He had known Jordan's pride, and this conversation was only going to get worse. "Do you really think it was all on me?" Jordan spat. "Do you think I'm stupid? I trusted you, Lee, and you lied. You took everything I worked for and sold it out to save your own skin." Lee's heart started to pound, a tightness in his chest, making it harder to breathe. He had never seen Jordan this angry, this close to the edge. And yet, the words didn't fully make sense to him. He hadn't betrayed Jordan, not in the way Jordan thought. But the hurt in his eyes was real. "Jordan, you're not seeing things clearly," Lee said, his voice softer now, trying to de-escalate. "This wasn't about you. I did what I had to do to keep Cash App moving forward. You know that. It wasn't personal." Jordan's lips curled into a bitter laugh. "Not personal? Lee, you don't get it, do you? It was personal to me. You don't just ruin someone's career, their life, and call it business." The words hit Lee harder than any punch. The weight of it all sank in. He had done something, some decision, some deal, that had left Jordan on the outside struggling to find his way again. The reality of his mistake hit Lee like a brick, but it didn't change the fact that Jordan was blowing things out of proportion. "You think I did it to hurt you?" Lee said, his voice rising with frustration. "I didn't even know what was going to happen. We took a risk together, but you didn't handle it well. You failed." The silence between them was thick and suffocating. Jordan's eyes were wild, and his breathing was shallow, almost erratic. "I didn't fail," Jordan growled. "You failed me, and I'm done pretending like we're still friends." Lee's chest tightened. "You need to calm down, Jordan. This isn't the place for this." Jordan stepped forward, his voice dangerously low. "Maybe I don't care about the place anymore." Lee took a step back instinctively, his gut telling him this conversation was heading toward a breaking point. But before he could move further away, Jordan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small paring knife, its sharp edge gleaming under the streetlights. Lee froze. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just a threat now, it was real. Jordan was holding the knife with a shaky hand, but the tension was clear. The years of resentment, anger, and betrayal had built to this moment. "Jordan, what are you doing?" Lee asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But Jordan didn't answer. Instead, his hand jerked forward, and before Lee could react, the knife slashed across his arm, deep enough to make him gasp in pain. Lee staggered back, his mind racing as the blood began to pool around his sleeve. "Stop!" Lee shouted, but the rage in Jordan's eyes was uncontrollable. The blade came down again, this time landing just above Lee's chest. He barely had time to react before the third strike came, a brutal stab that punctured his heart. Lee's world went dark as the pain surged through his body. He crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath, his heart fighting against the shock of the injury. Through his blurred vision, he saw Jordan standing over him, frozen in shock, the knife still clenched in his hand. Lee tried to speak, to say something, but all that came out was a weak, choking breath. His vision blurred, his body went numb, and before the world completely faded away, all he could think about was how this night, a night meant to celebrate, had become his final one. Lee's body hit the cold pavement with a sickening thud, his breath shallow and labored. Blood pooled around him, the life slowly draining out of him, but his mind couldn't focus. The world around him was a blur of lights, shadows, and distant noises. He could hear the traffic on the bridge, the hum of the city, but everything felt distant, muffled, as if he were underwater. Jordan stood over him, the knife still gripped tightly in his hand. He was shaking, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he stared at Lee's body. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. Lee tried to lift his hand, to push himself up, but it felt as though his body were made of lead. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, each thud reminding him of the precious time slipping away. He needed to move, to get help, but his body betrayed him. Jordan took a step back, his breath coming in short gasps. The shock was starting to wear off, replaced by a cold realization of what he had done. The knife gleamed in the dim light, stained with Lee's blood, the weight of his actions beginning to sink in. This wasn't supposed to happen, Jordan muttered to himself, his voice low and shaky. Lee's eyes fluttered open, trying to focus on his former friend. He couldn't find the words to speak, his throat too tight, but his gaze, filled with pain, betrayal, and confusion, spoke volumes. Jordan had been a friend once, someone Lee had trusted. And now, in the blink of an eye, that trust had shattered, leaving nothing but darkness in its wake. Jordan took another step back, but his feet were unsteady. His mind raced, his thoughts swirling. What had driven him to this point? Anger? Betrayal? Fear? All of it, he thought. He had been pushed too far. The lies, the failures, the years of waiting for recognition that never came, it had all built up to this moment. This one fatal decision. But even as Jordan stood there, the weight of his actions pressing down on him, he couldn't bring himself to call for help. He was terrified, and fear had a hold on him stronger than anything else. He dropped the knife, watching as it clattered to the ground beside Lee's motionless form. His heart raced in panic, but his mind struggled to find any clear path forward. What now? Meanwhile, back at the club, inside the vault, the party raged on. The music pulsed through the walls, and the laughter and chatter of the crowd continued, unaware of the tragedy unfolding just outside. The VIP room where Lee had celebrated his latest business success was filled with clinking glasses and shallow conversation. But amidst it all, something had changed. Detective Maya Carter sat in the back corner of the room, a drink untouched in front of her. She wasn't here to enjoy the party. She was here because the city had called her to investigate a case she didn't know would unfold quite like this. Maya had been at the party earlier, mingling with some of the business moguls who had come to celebrate Lee's success. But she'd left when the call came through. A body had been found near the Bay Bridge. She had been briefed on the basics. Lee Westbrook, the founder of Cash App, was dead. But there was something odd about the case. A successful man like Lee, surrounded by so many people, couldn't just disappear without anyone noticing. The clues were starting to stack up, but Maya didn't have enough information yet. Now, she sat in the club, watching the people around her. She knew the moment she walked in that not everyone in this room was innocent. Something had gone wrong, and it had to have started here in this very place. But Lee's death was only part of the puzzle. Maya knew there was more. There was always more. Jordan stood there, lost in thought, as Lee's lifeless body lay on the ground before him. The words he wanted to say, the excuses he wanted to make, stuck in his throat. He could feel the panic bubbling up inside him, the need to escape, to run, to get away from the mess he had just created. Without thinking, Jordan turned and ran. He didn't look back as he sprinted away from the bridge. His feet hit the pavement, but the distance didn't seem to matter. He had already made the decision. He was gone. He would vanish, disappear, and hope the world forgot what he had done. The minutes that followed felt like hours. Lee's body lay there, alone in the dark, the only sound the quiet rush of traffic across the Bay Bridge. His life was slipping away, but the mystery of his death was just beginning. Soon the sirens would come. Soon the truth would come out. But for now, the city carried on, unaware that its brightest star had been snuffed out in an instant. The sun had barely risen when the call came in. Lee Westbrook, founder of Cash App, was dead. Detective Maya Carter stood at the scene under the Bay Bridge, the city's skyline stretching before her, now just a distant backdrop to the tragedy that lay before her. Lee's body was still, the bloodstains marking the cold pavement like a cruel signature, a reminder of how quickly a life could be snuffed out. The early morning chill made her shiver, but it wasn't the cold that unsettled her. It was the shock of it all. Lee Westbrook, someone so successful, admired by many, was dead, and the truth behind his murder wasn't going to come easy. Maya knelt by the body, taking in the details. The stab wounds were precise, deliberate. The first had pierced Lee's upper arm, shallow but painful. The second had cut deeper, striking close to his ribs. And the final wound, the one that had taken his life, had been aimed directly at his heart. It wasn't just a killing, it was personal. As she looked around the scene, she could see the confusion beginning to spread among the officers. No one knew who had done this or why. There were no obvious witnesses, no clear suspect. But Maya knew that Lee's life had been tangled with more than just business. There were personal threads hidden beneath the surface, and she would need to pull on them one by one until the truth came out. Back at the police station, Maya sat at her desk, sorting through the limited information she had so far. Lee Westbrook had been a successful man, rich, powerful, influential. But all that success had come at a cost. The deeper she dug into his life, the more she discovered about the complex web of relationships he'd woven over the years. She started with his most recent business dealings. Cash App was booming, but it wasn't the only company Lee had his hands in. There were whispers of shady deals, high-stakes investments that had gone wrong, but none of it explained why someone would want to kill him. Then Maya received a break. One of Lee's business associates had mentioned Jordan Tanner, a name she recognized from the investigation. Jordan had been Lee's partner in an earlier venture, a tech startup that had failed miserably. Maya quickly learned that Jordan had been left with nothing after that failure, while Lee went on to build his empire. It wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. The search for Jordan Tanner. Maya's mind raced as she and her team began searching for Jordan. They had a name, but no real leads on where he was. She called in his known associates, but no one had seen him since the night of the murder. His phone had gone silent, and his social media profiles were wiped clean. The city was vast and Jordan was a ghost. But Maya wasn't giving up. She knew that the moment she found him, the pieces of the puzzle would start to fall into place. The breakthrough came when a tip came in. An anonymous caller said they had seen a man matching Jordan's description near the Bay Bridge late that night. Maya immediately put her team on the trail. They checked every security camera along the bridge, hoping for a clue, any clue that would lead them to Jordan. It didn't take long before they found something. A blurry image of a man leaving the scene, his face partially hidden, but unmistakably familiar. Jordan Tanner. The evidence was mounting, and Maya was one step closer to uncovering the truth. It had been 2 days since the murder, and Maya was growing more certain that Jordan Tanner was their man. She had spent hours piecing together the timeline of the night. Lee's final hours, the argument, the moments before the stabbing. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Jordan was the killer. Maya and her team tracked Jordan to a rundown apartment complex on the edge of the city. It was a far cry from the high-rise condos Lee had once called home, and it made Maya wonder how far Jordan had fallen. She knocked on the door, her badge visible, her presence commanding. Jordan opened the door slowly, his face pale and drawn, as if he hadn't slept in days. "Jordan Tanner?" Maya asked, her voice calm but firm. Jordan's eyes darted around, his nerves obvious. "What is this about?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "We need to talk about Lee Westbrook," Maya said, stepping into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "He's dead, Jordan, and we know you were there." Jordan's face drained of color, his hands trembling. I didn't mean to." Maya cut him off. "You didn't mean to? Jordan, you're the last person seen with him, and the evidence is all pointing to you. So, stop lying. What happened?" Jordan's lip quivered as he struggled for words. Finally, the truth spilled out. "I didn't want it to go this far," Jordan muttered, his voice breaking. "But he ruined me, Maya. He took everything. My career, my reputation. He left me with nothing." Jordan's eyes welled up with tears. "I wanted him to listen, to feel what I felt. I didn't mean for it to happen, but when I pulled the knife out, I lost control." Maya's heart ached for him, but she couldn't let the crime go unpunished. She had a job to do, and Jordan's confession made it clear that he wasn't going to get away with murder. Jordan was arrested that night, his face a mixture of regret and disbelief. He had been driven by a need for revenge, a need to make Lee understand his pain. But now, he was facing the consequences of his actions. As the police escorted him out of the apartment, Maya couldn't help but wonder about the choices they all made. How one moment of rage could destroy so many lives. The case was closed, but for those who knew Lee, the loss would never be forgotten. The Bay Bridge had witnessed it all, the rise, the fall, and the tragic end of a life that had once seemed invincible. The cell was cold, and the harsh fluorescent lights above buzzed incessantly, making the silence feel even heavier. Jordan sat on the edge of the metal bench, his hands shackled to the wall. His eyes were empty, staring blankly at the floor, as if he couldn't even bear to look at the reality of what he had done. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Detective Maya Carter appeared at the door. She had done her job, found the answers, but she wasn't sure she would ever fully understand why things had to end this way. She stepped into the room, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from Jordan. He didn't look up. His face was pale, his eyes swollen from the lack of sleep, from the weight of guilt that had settled over him like a fog. "You knew this was coming," Maya said, her voice steady. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact. Jordan finally lifted his head, his eyes hollow. "I never thought it would. I didn't plan it, Maya. I didn't mean for it to happen like that." His voice cracked, a mixture of fear and regret. Maya said nothing for a moment, just watched him as he crumbled under the reality of his own actions. She had seen this before, people who had let their emotions get the better of them, people who thought they had no way out, and people who couldn't take responsibility for the damage they had caused. But this was different. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary loss of control. It was a calculated act of revenge, a decision that had been brewing for months. Jordan had planned it in his head, even if he hadn't admitted it to himself until the very end. "Tell me what happened that night," Maya said. Jordan swallowed hard, and his lips trembled as he spoke. "I don't know what came over me. I thought I could confront him, maybe make him see how much he hurt me, how much he ruined everything for me. But then when I saw him again, I just lost it." His voice was shaky, the words tumbling out as if they had been trapped inside for far too long. "He didn't listen, Maya. He never listened. And I just wanted him to feel what I felt. But when I had the knife in my hand, it was like everything went dark." Maya listened closely, her expression neutral, but her mind raced. She could hear the weight of Jordan's words, the admission that his need for retribution had overpowered everything else. The bond they once shared, the years of friendship and trust that had been torn apart by betrayal. And it wasn't just the stabbing that had broken their relationship. It was the years of frustration, the unspoken resentment, and the inability to communicate. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving his face. "You thought you were getting back at him, but now you've lost everything. Your freedom, your reputation, Your future. Jordan's shoulders sagged, his face falling into his hands. I don't know what I thought, Maya. I thought I could make him understand. I thought I could fix everything by showing him the pain he caused. But I ended up destroying everything. Maya let out a breath, feeling the weight of the situation. She had done her job. The evidence was clear, and the truth had come out. But there was still something unsettling about the entire case. Lee's death, while senseless, had been part of a much bigger picture. It wasn't just about a betrayal in business. It was about people breaking, about trust being destroyed over time, and about choices that seemed small in the moment but turned catastrophic in the end. The courtroom. Months later, the courtroom was packed with reporters, friends, and family members. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with the weight of what had transpired. Lee's family sat quietly in the front row, their grief palpable, their eyes red and swollen from the loss of a man who had meant so much to them. The room buzzed with whispers, the gravity of the situation sinking in as Jordan Tanner, once a respected entrepreneur, stood trial for the murder of Lee Westbrook. Jordan, now dressed in an orange jumpsuit, sat at the defendant's table, his face gaunt and weary. His once pristine suit was replaced by the reality of prison life, and his eyes no longer carried the confidence they once had. He had been a man with ambition, someone who had once dreamed of changing the world. But now, all of those dreams were shattered, crushed under the weight of his own choices. The prosecutor laid out the case, recounting the events leading up to Lee's death. The evidence was undeniable. Jordan had confronted Lee. The argument had escalated, and in a moment of blind rage, Jordan had used a knife to kill him. But it wasn't just the physical act of murder that stood out. It was the emotional destruction behind it. The years of resentment, the sense of betrayal that had festered until it exploded. Jordan's defense lawyer tried to paint the situation as a tragic accident, a momentary lapse in judgment. But the jury didn't buy it. The facts were clear. Jordan had made a choice, and that choice had cost a man his life. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read the sentence. Jordan's head dropped in defeat, the weight of the reality crashing down on him. His future, once full of possibility, now seemed distant and unreachable. Detective Maya Carter stood outside the courthouse, watching the reporters swarm around Jordan as he was led away in handcuffs. She couldn't help but feel the finality of it all. The case was closed, but the impact would remain. Lee Westbrook was gone, and while justice had been served, it felt hollow. No one had won here. Not really. Maya's eyes drifted over the city, her thoughts heavy with the weight of the case. She had seen too many lives destroyed by a single decision, too many people who thought they had no way out, no one to listen to them. But that wasn't true. People just needed to choose a different path, a different way of reacting when they were hurt. It wasn't always about revenge or anger. Sometimes it was about letting go. As Maya walked away from the courthouse, she couldn't help but wonder how many more people in this city were just one bad decision away from losing everything. And as the sun began to set over the Bay Bridge, she made a silent promise to herself. She would keep fighting to stop that from happening.